And this is Capturing Light, episode number 151 with Neil Oseman.
Welcome to Capturing Light, a director of photographers podcast, spotlighting cinematography tips, tools, and techniques, inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. And now, your host, Les Gaddis.
Welcome to the Capturing Light podcast. I'm your host, Les Gaddis, and today we are talking to Neil Oseman. He is a cinematographer and a showrunner, and this is the second time that I've actually talked to Neil. We're talking about Ren Season 2, which will be dropping soon. And this podcast was great for a lot of reasons. We talked a little bit about Neil's journey into the industry. We talked about Ren, obviously, but we got pretty technical too, which sometimes can be daunting for people that may not understand it, but it's a great way to learn. And, we talked about POV shooting. We talked about day for night shooting. It was really just a great conversation. So I think you'll enjoy it. Here's that interview with Neil Oseman. All right, so I want to thank Neil Oseman for coming on the Capturing Light podcast again. How are you?
I'm good, thanks, Les. How are you?
I am good. So the last time we talked was, like before COVID. It's been quite a few years.
Yeah, strange few years.
Right. Yeah, no, definitely for everybody, for the world.
Mhm.
So last time we chatted, we actually talked about the first season of Ren, the project that
Mhm.
we're going to be talking about because you're working on that as well for the second season. But before we get to that,
Mhm.
for someone that hasn't like listened to the first podcast, could you talk a little bit about, like your story, becoming a cinematographer and how you got into the industry?
Sure. Yeah, well, I used to make amateur films as a teenager. I used to borrow my granddad's Video 8 camcorder and go make stupid films in the back garden with my friends. And I got really into doing that, and I'd sort of built up a little sort of show reel by the time I was 18. Um, and it was a show reel on VHS back then. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in what was going to be my gap year. I was going to go study film at university. And I did a short filmmaking course, which I really enjoyed. It was my first contact with professional filmmakers who were teaching the workshops, and we got to make a short film at the end and be assistants to them as heads of department. And then I showed my show reel to the producer of the course, who also ran the production company. And she obviously saw some potential and started hiring me. So that's kind of how I started out at 19 as a freelancer, and I was mostly working on industrial videos to start with, training films, short films, kind of funded by local government to sort of help young people with issues with drugs or things like that. And I sort of worked my way up. I quite quickly became a camera operator, and then sort of one project about a year into my career, we sort of had some lights and no one really knew what to do with them, so I just started playing with them and sort of taught myself lighting. And Yeah, I sort of worked my way up the budgets, I suppose. And these days, as a DP, I mostly shoot sort of. I've gone up from no budget and micro budget to low budget now, by the sort of
Nice.
official classifications.
Right.
Low budget and occasional medium budget features. Yeah, so I just did one that has just come out in the UK theatrically, which is an adaptation of Hamlet with Ian McKellen, which is very exciting.
Very cool. So from, I guess, teaching yourself lighting,
Mm.
camera, and kind of working on, I guess, no budget industrial videos and things like that, like
Mm.
how did you transition into the narrative space and narrative world? Because I know a
Mm.
lot of people may start kind of doing commercial or corporate type work, and they're like, oh, if I could do a cool
Mm,
series like Ren
mm.
or like a narrative feature, like how did you transition between the two?
Well, I guess I was lucky in that some of the videos I was doing early on, the ones that were sort of about issues, drugs, teenage pregnancy, that sort of thing, they were actually dramas. So often the scripts would be workshopped with these groups of young people, and then the young people would act in these films. And then what we call participatory video here. I don't know if that's a term you use in the US, but yeah, so I sort of got into narrative partly through that, and then partly by just, joining online networks. We have Shooting People here in the UK. We have Mandy.com, which I think is international.
Mm-hmm.
Joining things like that and just applying for and doing a load of unpaid or really, really low paid short films and no budget features. That's
Right.
basically all into it. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So then kind of moving and jumping from like your start in the industry
Mm.
to working on the first season of Ren,
Mm.
like how were you brought onto the project?
Mm.
'Cause were you just a cinematographer at that point?
Yes, I was. Yeah. So I had worked with Kate Madison, who directed the first season and co-created it. I had worked with her a tiny little bit before, a few years before she'd made a Lord of the Rings fan film called Born of Hope, which has been hugely successful on YouTube. It's got sort of 50 million views or something crazy now.
Wow.
I just did a couple of days. That was one of those jobs that I saw on one of those online networks. I did a couple of days on that as a camera operator and camera assistant, and sort of kept in touch because I was really impressed with what she was doing. And I guess by the time she was in pre-production on Ren season one, I had done probably six or eight sort of really, really tiny budget features. I had just done another web series, which was a version of The Three Musketeers. So a similar kind of historical feel to it,
Mm-hmm.
with some of the same crew involved, actually. Yeah, so I guess I was a sort of natural fit for Ren, and I was very excited to do it. I can remember at least one phone call really pitching hard to get hired on it.
Right. So then you finished season one
Hmm.
as the DP, and
Hmm.
then now we're talking about season two, and now you're not only the cinematographer, the DP, but you're also show running it.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the transition from season one to season two and how that all
Mm.
happened?
Mm. So I mean, I loved working on season one so much. I got involved with post-production. So I was a sort of a post-production supervisor. I did a few of the VFX, just generally helping to get it finished and out there. And I was always sort of in touch with Kate about, when is it going to continue? What form is it going to continue in? And of course, Kate had cast Sophie Skelton as the lead in season one, which was a sort of a brilliant casting move in one respect because she was then sort of snapped up to play Bree in Outlander. So she's pretty huge now. But of course, it did mean she couldn't come back for the next season of Ren, which was one of the reasons that we didn't go straight into a season two
Mm-hmm.
after season one was released. And yeah, and then sort of life happens and various things, and I sort of I helped Kate when she was trying to get season two off the ground in 2019 and early 2020, which is when we last spoke, and I was sort of associate producer at that point, and I'd sort of been involved in the writing team too. And then when COVID happened, it seemed like it had drawn a line for good under the project. But I just couldn't quite let it go. During
Mm-hmm.
one of the lockdowns, like a lot of people, I was looking for something to do to fill my time, and I decided to write another draft of Ren season two. And I got kind of really into that and ended up writing a draft of season three as well. And then when the lockdown started to ease, my first thought was, well, that was fun, but I'm just going to put that away because it's never going to happen. But that thought never really went away. And finally, towards the end of, I guess it was 2022, I went to Kate and to Christopher Dane, who was the other creator of the series, and said, look, you guys aren't doing anything with it. How would you feel about me taking it on? I think there's so much potential here. You've created a great world. The story ended on a cliffhanger. I would love to continue that. And yeah, they very kindly said yes. In fact, Chris's response was basically, I think you're crazy, but sure, go ahead. And he may have been right. He may have been right.
That's funny. So how, like, from, I guess, the transition from Ren season one to Ren season two,
Mhm,
like, um what was the process of starting,
mhm,
and kind of jumping back into the world of Ren for season two, and like,
mhm,
you know, kind of like as a showrunner,
mhm,
and like producer and all the
mhm.
things that I know you wear many hats. Like, how
Yeah.
did you even, kind of rally the troops to get production done?
Well, I think there was still a lot of enthusiasm. There were a lot of people like me who'd either worked on season one or had really enjoyed watching it, who really wanted to see it continue even after all that time.
Hmm.
So obviously the first thing was sort of contacting all the key people, seeing who was able to come back. Obviously, for some people, life had moved on, careers had moved on, things just wasn't possible, but we were able to get several key people back involved. The fight choreographer, the composer, some of the cast returned. Several people who had kind of volunteered as extras or helping to make sets and things actually came back and were very keen to get involved again. Um, and then, yeah, it was just all the usual sort of producing stuff, really, of working out the budget, the schedule, looking for locations, which I think was one of the hardest things. And yeah, finding a studio space as well, that was key. Something we did on season one is we hired a disused factory for a few months, and we built the village in the parking lot. And although we didn't quite have to build a village this time, I knew that having that kind of space where volunteers could come and help out would be really important. And I found a farm where the farmer was super keen, and he had a grain store that was empty during the summer. So we built our sets in there, and in fact, he had a medieval barn next to it. Then we turned one end of that into a tavern. Um, yeah, so it was a great space to base ourselves in. Of course, all the fields and things we used for some of the outdoor scenes as well. So it was really handy.
Wow. So from a production standpoint, how long did it take you to do production, like to
Mhm.
to shoot season two?
It was 24 days, I think, so that's for the season runs about an hour in total. Uh,
Okay. Okay.
so
And
yeah.
I know we're kind of bouncing around from showrunner hat to cinematographer hat, but for all of the people that look at, the trailer and have
Mhm.
followed, like, could you talk a little bit about camera package, lenses, so people can kind of understand the look of it?
Sure. Yeah, well, we were extremely lucky, and I really have to say a huge thanks to Ari Rental in London, because they did us an absolutely insane deal on an Alexa Mini and a set of Cooke S4 Classics, which, I mean, if you told me when I was shooting season one that we would get to do season two on that package, I would have lost my mind.
Right, because if I remember, was season one on the Pocket?
I don't think the Pocket had come out even. It was one of the early Blackmagic cinema
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
it was the Blackmagic production camera, the first 4K one, and then I think we had a Blackmagic Cinema as the B camera.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember it being Black Magic. That's awesome. Okay.
Mm,
So, and for this new season, with the mini and the cooks,
mm,
did you do any filtration or were you pretty
mm.
clean on the lenses?
I was clean, yeah. I mean, I've used a half soft effects filter on a lot of projects, particularly genre projects in the past, but yeah, just for sort of keeping continuity with season one, where we didn't have any kind of filtration, I decided to shoot this clean.
Right. So, um, and from like a crew standpoint, like
Mhm.
was it I'm assuming it's a fairly smaller crew based off of kind of
Yeah,
budget and things.
yeah, as a smallish crew, I mean, we were lucky enough to get a couple of good, really good focus pullers, Hermes Contreras and Matt Davis. And Hermes came on for the first week. I've worked with him on numerous projects that I've DP'd, and he's super experienced. In fact, he actually worked on season one, shooting behind the scenes footage. He was quite early on in his career at that point, but since then he's gone on to become this really successful focus puller. So he very generously did the first week for us, and he took a guy called Cijo Joy, who had basically just graduated from a film course, and he was super keen and into being in the camera department, but he had very, very little experience, certainly on this level. And Hermes was able to take him in just a few days of really, really intensive, in the evenings, after we wrapped, really showed him the ropes and turned him into a really good second AC. And so CJ Joy stayed with us the whole shoot, and was fantastic to work with. And then yeah, after Hermes did that first week, Matt Davis took on the focus pulling for the rest of the run. And then we had a couple of other people that sort of came in and out. Rupert Peddle, who is an amazing Steadicam operator that I've worked with several times. He generously gave us a couple of days when we particularly needed that. We were able to borrow a small jib off a friend. So yeah, we kind of we got by.
Right. No, that's awesome. And so you're the cinematographer. Did you
Mhm.
were you also cam operating or did you have
Yes.
an operator? Okay,
Yeah, I was.
got it. Okay, cool. And so like I know season two, by the time this releases, it's gonna be coming out, within the near future.
Mhm.
Um, could you talk a little bit about? I know that there's some day for night stuff that
Mhm.
you shot, and so many people they they mess up day for night. So could you talk a
Yeah.
little bit
Well,
about your experience with that on Ren, and then
mm.
potentially give like a tip or two to someone that might be thinking, okay, how am I supposed to shoot day for night?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm not entirely sure I didn't mess it up, but yeah, I will certainly share. I'll share what I learned because yeah, when I knew we had to do day, but basically the season two starts with a horse chase through a forest at night. So I knew that we were never realistically going to be able to do it night for night. We couldn't have lit a big stretch of forest, even if it would have been sort of safe and reasonable to work with the horses through the night. Um, so yeah, I did sort of ask around other DPs and colorists for advice, and I really didn't get much back except don't do it. uh, which is more or less what I've always told producers when they ask me as a DP, can we do this scene day for night? I've always pushed back against it. Um, so in the end, I sort of had to use my own judgment. I decided I would shoot a stop underexposed. I would keep at the native ISO, and I think I set the white balance to 4,000 Kelvin, so it was cool but not super cool. Uh,
Hmm.
and And the other decision I made was not to, when we were doing closer shots where I might normally have used a bounce board to fill in the shadows on people's faces a bit, I decided not to do that because I figured it should be more contrasty if it's meant to be night. Um, and yeah, then of course we got into the grade. We had an amazing colorist, Mara Chiorba from Cheat here in London, who she's sort of a trainee colorist who was recommended to me, and she did an amazing job on the show. Obviously, the day for night stuff was the biggest challenge for her. And I think what I learned, sort of having been through that whole process now, is um, firstly, I wish that I had done the bounce actually, because although sort of night for night scenes are quite high contrast, when you do day for night, it is actually very low contrast because you're only using, unlike if you would lit it at night when you might have a bright backlight around stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, uh, Day for night is all very low down in the sort of tonal range. So it is quite low contrast. So I do wish I'd had that bit of sparkle in the eye and filled in the shadows on the faces a little bit. I think that would have just helped the performances come through a bit once they were darkened down in the grade.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and another thing I know people ask about, and I certainly asked about before I was doing it, was should you try to keep the sky out of frame? Um, and we were in a forest, so it wasn't too much of an issue. And there were only a few shots where there was a risk of that. Um, and I didn't worry about it too much because I'd sort of read, sky replacements fairly easy these days, which I think is true in some circumstances. But actually, if you're dealing with trees, and particularly if they're out of focus, and you've got all these bokeh leaves in the background that, and all your pixels are somewhere between the dark of the leaf and the bright of the sky, then sort of replacing that sky, keying it out is next to impossible. Uh,
Right.
So I think, yeah, if you're relying on sky replacement, do think about, like how hard is the edge? How easy is it going to be to key whatever's in front of the sky. Um, and then the final thing that I discovered very late in the day was it's worth testing your workflow the whole way through,
Right.
because Ren is released primarily on YouTube, and of course YouTube's notoriously bad for compression. Uh,
Right.
and as I discovered, particularly in dark tones, and I've sort of been researching this lately, and there are two codecs it uses. I think one is AVC1, and the other one is, I want to say, VPO9. Um, and a workaround I found is if you upload in 4K, even if you didn't shoot 4K and it means upscaling, it will force YouTube to use VPO9, which is the better codec, and it's much, much, much better in the shadows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Unfortunately, you still, as a viewer, you will only see that better codec if you're streaming it above 1080p. So yeah, I would definitely recommend to anyone shooting day for night, think about how the film is going to be delivered, how it's going to be compressed, and try to test that workflow end to end.
Right. Well, and the key point that you mentioned is the end to end,
Mm,
because some people they'll test it up until color, but
mm,
then they won't test upload it and see what happens. They're like, "Oh yeah, it looks fantastic in color," but you just don't think about the delivery aspect of it too. So, that's
yeah.
really really I mean all of it is great advice, honestly,
Mm,
about just the day for night shooting.
mm,
There's another technical aspect that I'm actually looking forward to seeing,
mm,
and it's the spirit memories, and
yeah.
like shooting something that is like a first person video game. Could
Mm,
you talk a
yeah.
little bit about how you implemented that in Ren?
Yeah, so the premise of the show is that the lead character Ren has bonded with an ancient spirit, and this spirit has had many hosts in the past. And in season two, she starts to see bits of some of one of those hosts' memories, in particular, the sort of aftermath of a battle. And so we knew that we wanted to shoot this as a POV. Um, we knew we couldn't just do it with the camera on the shoulder because we had to have the character's hands, our hands in inverted commas, come up into frame and interact with another character. So I think the director who for that episode was Christopher Dane. He originally said a GoPro would be the way to go, and I've got to say I pushed back against it because at that time I thought, well, you can't get a cinematic gradable image out of a GoPro. So I pushed to use a Blackmagic pocket camera, and we actually had a sort of helmet cam rig custom made for us. And it was a great rig. The only problem was it kind of stuck out. The camera was it was right in front of your. If I'm trying to think where it might have been a little higher up, sort of around about your eyes or forehead. But even though the pocket camera is a relatively small camera, once you've got a lens on the front of it, and we were using a 14 mil, but it sticks out quite a way. So when the operator held his hands up, they still didn't look right. It didn't quite look like a POV. So we actually ended up reshooting the scene, not just because of that, but there were various other problems with the original version as well. And the second time around, I did investigate GoPros properly. And I also considered phones as well. I sort of did a bit of testing of newer iPhones to see if their cinematic mode might be useful, but I sort of found that too fake looking and processed. So in the end, I landed on a GoPro Hero 11 Mini, because I discovered a friend of mine uses GoPros a lot, and he'd sort of given me the lowdown on it. And yeah, the 11 onwards have 10-bit color. You can set a flat color profile. There's a GoPro app that comes with it, and then there's a third-party app called, I think it's GoPro Quick, which gives you access under the hood to other settings. So you can set your bit rate, you can set your noise reduction. You've got control over, you can go up to 5.7K. Yeah, it was really good, and it worked beautifully. And then we had a sort of chest harness with a little arm that came up to here, so the camera was rigged. Of course, I'm I'm trying to show this visually, but it's a podcast. But
Right.
it was mounted just under the chin.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and we had the costume had a collar on it, and we had the costume department cut a little hole for the lens to poke out of. And it worked really, really nicely. We were able to control it remotely with an app. Yeah, we got 10-bit color out of it. It turned out to be quite nicely gradable. It was quite a sunny day when we shot, so the scene had a high latitude, and we really, some of the key action was in the shadows a bit. Yeah, it was quite a test for the dynamic range of the camera, and I thought it did really well. Um, and even the sort of fisheye effect, once it was cropped to our 2:3:9 aspect ratio, it kind of looked like an old anamorphic lens, the sort of bowing
Mm-hmm.
of the horizontals.
Right.
Yeah, so I thought it worked out perfectly. I mean, the only sort of thing that you really can't do with it is you can't have a shallow depth of field, because the sensor on that thing is just tiny. Uh,
Right.
but yeah, that wasn't really an issue for me. Although we were shooting most of the series at 2.8 or 4, I was quite happy for these flashbacks to have a different look.
Right. Well, and I mean, when you're talking about having a strong point of view too, like, I
Mm,
mean, just, like in the real world, you're usually seeing everything, in focus,
mm,
without like the shallowness of like a
mm,
2.8. So like, I mean, I think it sounds like it works beautifully,
mm,
to keep the audience engaged in something that they would normally feel like, oh, okay, this is
mm,
point of view. Yeah, it looks exactly how it should,
mm,
because that's
mm.
how it
Yeah.
would look if I were there.
Yeah. Oh, the other thing I forgot to mention is at the end of the scene, we had the character who's called Talon, whose POV we're seeing, has to go and look down into a puddle and see his reflection.
Oh,
So
that's
kind of
fun.
yeah. But it worked perfectly. We kind of assumed we would have to paint out the lens of the GoPro, but actually, more by luck than by judgment, he lent just enough so that we could see his whole head, but we didn't quite see under his chin in the
Oh,
reflection.
wow.
So it
That's
looked
amazing.
fantastic. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to that.
Mm,
Um, that's so cool. So I know we talked a little bit about day for night. We
mm.
talked about the spirit memories and the POV. Now let's move on to night for night,
Yeah.
and like shooting something,
Mm,
you know, to look continuous.
mm,
Um, and I'm not sure how long it took to shoot,
mm,
like, and how do you balance that? Like, could you talk a little bit about
mm.
shooting, over the course of multiple nights and making something look like it's
Yeah.
shot at the same time?
Yeah. So in episode 3, we have this big fight scene on a bridge which was shot over 4 nights. It was done in this on this really sort of very steeply humpbacked medieval type bridge in South Wales, which was a beautiful location. Unfortunately, we had permission from the farm next door to run power cables. So we didn't have to have generators and things. That was really nice. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd actually, I mean, it's kind of a huge risk looking back on it now, but we didn't actually do a physical recce of it. I happened to have a friend who's a gaffer who lived very close to it. So he went there a couple of times and took some measurements and photos and things. But it was kind of a 4 or 5 hour drive from where I live and where the rest of the production was based. So the
Mm-hmm.
rest of us never actually went there. We sort of did Google Street View location scouts, and yeah, so we were taking a slight risk, but we'd sort of, we'd taken measurements and things. We were pretty confident we could get the lights to where we needed them. And we had that gaffer friend of mine actually went and scouted up where we could put our sort of our main moon source. Um, so our gaffer for the show was a great guy called Jeremy Dawson, and he provided the lighting package, and it was mostly apertures. So we had a 200, 300, and 600,
Mm-hmm.
and some Amaran mats, and some tungsten as well, which we used occasionally. And we also for that particular night shoot, we hired in a an aperture 1200D to be the moon, just because we were a little bit worried the 600 wasn't going to have enough punch.
Mm-hmm.
And the nice thing about doing that, I think with hindsight, the 600D would have had enough punch, sort of hard. But if we wanted to use the aperture, do this lantern attachment, which I've discovered is just great for moonlight. And there's something about the quality of it I found that just really looks like moonlight on camera to me. So we were able to put that on the 1200D, and although that lost us a little bit of output, yeah, it had a great quality to the light.
Yeah, so
Uh,
that lantern
mm,
attachment you put on the 1200, you
on the
said?
1200, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
that's
got
right.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was our main source. Unfortunately, the layout of the location was such that there was this kind of high bank, a sort of retaining wall for a main road that went past nearby, and we were able to get up onto this retaining wall and put the 1200D up there. So, we didn't need, a cherry picker or condors or anything like that. So that worked out in our favor. Yeah, we were able to do a cable run back to a mains outlet, which was great. And then our other main source was, I think it would have been the 600D fired into Ultra Bounce, a 12 by 12 Ultra Bounce, which just sort of came in from one side. Um, we did get stuck a little bit when we were on the bridge, because it was quite a narrow bridge. Essentially, if you were looking sort of parallel with the bridge, you were always sort of, looking towards one light and it had another light exactly behind you because you couldn't get them out to the sides. So
Mm-hmm.
that did give us a bit of headaches with shadows and things. We just we tried to sort of soften off the light, or to break off some branches and just have a bit of leaf shadow if things were getting a bit too frontal. Um, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's actually easier to shoot a night scene over 4 nights than it is to do a day scene over 4 days, because you have complete control over the lighting.
Right.
You're not sort of at the mercy of whatever the weather's decided to do this day. And we were very fortunate with the weather, by the way. I don't think we had a drop of rain while we were there, which was great. Actually, the one thing that did threaten the continuity a bit is it was spring at the time, and the spot where we had placed the 1200D had some foliage in front of it, and you could actually, because we were paying close attention to it, you could actually see the leaves growing on the trees over the 4 days. As in, we would notice each day that less and less of the light was getting through.
Oh
Um,
wow.
I think if we'd been there another couple of days, we would have needed like a bigger light.
Right. Wow, that's interesting. And were you worried like I'm not sure if like from a moonlight standpoint, if you were kind of using that in like a backlight kind of type situation, were you worried about moving that moonlight between different shots and things like that, or
No, I mean, I think Jeremy and I decided quite early on that it was just impractical to do that. Just given that there was only really that one spot where the layout of the location gave us the height we needed to keep it out of frame,
Mhm.
and it would actually be able to cover everything. Um, yeah, and we had a small crew. So yeah, we decided quite early on we were just going to leave that there. Um, I don't think if we were shooting, if we turned the camera around and we had our back to it, we would either soften it or add a branch for shadows. But most of the time we were shooting roughly towards it, or, on an angle. Um, and we knew, because we did the fight was choreographed in a sort of studio space, and we had the measurements of the bridge, and we sort of put cardboard boxes to represent the sides of the bridge. And so I knew when we were choreographing it with Ronin, the fight choreographer, and with Johnny, the director, I was able to say, "Oh, can we not look that way, because we'll be looking
Right.
directly into our moon source
Mhm.
there." So we were able to sort of plan around that a little bit. And we did have, I think, as well as the 600D into the bounce, we had another source. And we did move that around a little bit when we needed to. And we had a 300, I think it would have been a 300D sort of tucked around a corner, just to give a
Mhm.
backlight from that direction when we looked that way. And every now and then, if those sources really weren't working and the camera had to look in a lot of directions, because we had a fair bit of handheld stuff, we would boom, or Jeremy would boom a God, I can't think. I think it might have been a Falcon Eyes, or something like that, with some diffusion on it. He would just kind of boom
Mhm.
it so that he could be mobile and stay out of shot.
Okay, cool. And there's one last kind of situation that I want to talk about, and
Mm.
it's the heretics market,
Mhm.
and just dealing with filming in candlelight.
Yeah.
And like as a cinematographer, you're like, "Ooh, it's gonna be awesome," but then I know like
Mm.
it introduces challenges if you're not, you know, aware or used to shooting in low light or candlelight. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Mhm. Yeah, so the Heretics Market is the main setting for episode 4. And we built it as a set. Rose Collis, the production designer, did an absolutely amazing job of creating this sort of underground black market. And it was the sources were yeah, candlelight. So we had a lot of candles around the space, and lanterns, which were supposed to have candles inside them. And we wanted the odd shaft of daylight coming down, as well, as if they're it's meant to be a sort of crypt, or a partly man-made foundations of some ruined castle. that they're in. So the odd shaft of hard daylight. Sophie Black, who directed that episode, was quite keen to for the overall color to be quite cool. So we kept the daylight on the bluish side, and then just had the pools of warmer light. And we used a lot of real candles. I mean, the very first time I did a production with candlelight was actually the first Musketeer, the web series I did before Ren season one. And back then I was like, oh, every time we have a candle, I've got to put up a dado or something to give a pool of light from that. Yeah, I don't do that anymore. I kind of
Hmm.
I try to let the candlelight do as much for real as it possibly can. I've shot with the Alexa at 1600 ISO a few times, and it does have some noise, but it's kind of noise that I like. It's quite usable, quite gradable. So I knew that I could shoot 1600 ISO at 2.8. And I think maybe very occasionally I would go to 2 2/3 if I just needed a little bit of extra, because the cooks are a two, I think.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I wanted to stay away from wide open.
Right.
Uh,
And the camera setting, from a white balance perspective, do you remember like what you were viewing the white balance on the Alexa?
yeah, I think it was about 4300, so sort
Hmm.
of the midway. And I think we went for 6,000 Kelvin on there. We had two Amaran mats, which we boomed over the top, to use as sort of top light, generic
Hmm.
top light. I think those were on 6,000 Kelvin. And then our anything that was matching to candlelight was obviously sort of 3,000 or below. We had a number of Pavo tubes. I don't know if you've come across them, but they're these sort of, I don't
Yeah,
know.
the nan light Pavos.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. Uh-huh. Right, right.
So yeah, we had a few of those, and sometimes we would set them to sort of candlelight flickering patterns. Other times we found it was better just to fix on a one static color. And we
Hmm.
would tuck those. We got through a load of cable ties, just attaching those to the framework of the market stalls, tucking them into corners and hiding them behind things. Um, the art department also bought a whole bunch of tiny, like little LED tea light type things.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So they put those in some of the lanterns and candle holders, just so we were minimizing the real sort of naked flames where we could. Um, yeah, so it was quite a mix of real candles, fake candles, and then the Pavo tubes supplementing them, and then all against the sort of bluer palette of the Amaran top light. Oh, and then the shafts of light were done with Source 4's gelled blue.
Okay. Awesome. So for people that want to watch season two, how can they do that and when does it come out?
Yeah, so I think by the time you're hearing this, all of season two should be out on our Patreon page. Patreon's how we fund the series. So all four episodes drop or will have dropped there on March the 8th. And then on YouTube, the episodes start coming out weekly on March 16th. And season one is already up there. If you haven't seen season one, go check it out. Our YouTube channel is called Mythica Entertainment. So if you search Mythica Entertainment or search Ren the Girl with a Mark, you will find that channel on YouTube. And there's loads of behind the scenes content on there as well if you're interested to see how we make it, as I'm sure a lot of listeners will be.
Awesome. Yeah, for sure. And how can people keep up with you and follow what you're doing? Could you give us your
Yep.
social and website as well?
Yeah, it's neilosman.com is my website. That's NEILOSEMAN.com. I don't blog on there as much at the moment as I used to, just because of being busy with Ren. But I am posting some of my blogs from the Hamlet film actually over the next few weeks. And Instagram is also a great way to see. I post lighting diagrams there every Friday, which have proven very popular. So I just take a frame of something I've shot and then just sort of zoom out and show where all the lights were. And yeah, that's every Friday on Instagram. Again, it's just Neil Oseman is my Instagram handle.
Awesome. And lastly, I want to end on just a tip for someone that um, might have been following you for a while. They want to do, maybe it's the film student that just graduated and they're like, I want to shoot narrative. What would you tell that person that's just starting out that wants to, get into shooting features, series, things like that?
Mm. Well, I'd say first of all, like don't turn your nose up at shooting, industrial films, promotional films, that kind of thing. It's fantastic experience. And as much as we've probably all struggled with clients giving notes that we don't agree with, whatever kind of film you make, there's always going to be someone above you who sometimes wants you to do something different to the way you want to do it, and learning to deal with that and be diplomatic about it is a huge learning experience too. So
Hmm.
there's a lot to be learned from doing those kind of films. And then yeah, I guess as in terms of getting into narrative, if if you're sort of willing to go in at the bottom of the department and be a trainee, so search out second ACs, because second ACs usually are the ones that are hiring the trainees. So get to know second ACs. If you're already a DP and you want to be shooting narrative stuff, then it's just doing it as much as you can. Do the unpaid jobs, the low paid jobs. Try to find the ones that have a great production designer, because that reflects well on you. I find a lot of people, they watch a show reel, they can't really separate good cinematography from good production design and all the other things that go into making a show look great. So yeah, if you've got something that looks good in all the departments, it'll reflect well on you and help you to get more work and bigger work, I think.
Right. Awesome. Well, Neil, thanks so much for just the tips that you've given, the amazing breakdowns of the different situations that happened in season 2 of Ren. And I just appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to seeing the second season.
Amazing. Thanks so much.
So again, I want to thank Neil for coming on the Capture and Light podcast. Be sure to follow him, keep up with what he's doing. Go to Ren's social media. Follow them on Instagram. There's a TikTok page as well. Go to YouTube, watch it, subscribe. It's a great series. If you're watching this before season 2 comes out and you haven't seen season 1, go watch season 1. But yeah, it's great. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Les@gaddisvisuals.com is my email. You can also hit me up on social. Find me on Instagram or TikTok or wherever. All of my social handles are usually at Les Gaddis. You can find me. Yeah, great episode. I really enjoyed this one. Fantastic conversation. So thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Capturing Light.
Thanks for listening to Capturing Light with Les Gaddis, a director of photographers podcast. Inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. A Gaddis Visuals production.